Hello and welcome to another video in the series of history from the Vale of Glamorgan. Today coming to you from Ogmore Castle on the outskirts of Bridgend. Today we're going to be examining something that puts this place on the map. Two celebrities of world renown passed through here and put this place absolutely centre stage of the known world. But who were they? Why did they come here? After all, this isn't exactly the centre of the universe. Unless, of course, you believe the universe to be infinite, in which case everywhere is the centre. Under normal circumstances, the two people at the centre of this story, one William Cragh and one Mary de Brouize, would have been sworn enemies. They were on either side of a particularly messy war. But for one event, they became inexplicably united. And it is that event that led to what we're going to be uncovering here today. So our story begins in 1283 with a Welsh nobleman called Rhys ab Maredudd. He was an ally of the English crown and he'd helped Edward I crush rebellions. So around about 1290, Rhys felt slighted by what he deemed to be rather paltry rewards and mounted his own rebellion. His rebellion was short-lived, and by 1292 he had been captured, arrested and executed. But at the height of his revolt, he had under his command a warrior from Llanrhidian on the North Gower coast by the name of William Cragh. Cragh and a detachment of men had mounted a raid on one of the castles of William de Brouize, the Norman lord of Gower. The fighting was intense, but when it was concluded, Cragh and 14 others had been captured by de Brouize's son. There had been a lot of Norman bloodshed in the attack, and for his part, Cragh stood charged with the murder of 13 men. But who was William Cragh? We have conflicting evidence about what sort of a person he was. In some accounts he's described as being just a lowly, common, petty thief. However, we also have some pretty compelling evidence to the contrary. In order to try and secure his release, he offered de Brouize 100 head of cattle, which in its day was a huge sum. Very valuable. Not something that would have been at the disposal of a common petty criminal. So clearly, Cragh was genuinely a man of means. We have other evidence to suggest that he was a significant figure. Out of all the people that they managed to capture on this raid, the only two who faced justice were Cragh himself and Treharna Powell, the descendant of a Welsh nobleman. So clearly these two men were significant figures. After their trial, the two men, having been found guilty, were imprisoned in the dungeons below Swansea Castle. A scaffold was built outside. A date was set, and they were to be hung in the square in front of the castle. Execution day came, and the job of hanging Treharna Powell went without a snag. But when it came to hanging William Cragh, the scaffold collapsed. Now, there are a lot of superstitions about things like that, or religious connotations, however you look at it, but generally speaking, in many instances, if an attempt is made to execute somebody and something happens to prevent that execution from coming, a lot of people interpret that as being God's way of telling you he does not intend this man to die. So a lot of people concluded that surely Cragh would now be released to go free. But de Brouize had other ideas. These troublesome Welsh needed to be taught a lesson, and they needed to see Cragh swing from the gallows. Not everyone went along with this, and one of the most fierce opponents turned out to be his own wife. When Cragh was again taken into the town square to be hung for a second time, this time the scaffold held strong. There seemed little doubt that the execution had gone ahead without a hitch, at least at first. There are quite long and detailed accounts of the hanging and its aftermath. Cragh's body hung there for several days, his head bloated with blood that could not circulate past the noose. I'll spare you the rest of the gory details, but suffice it to say that when he was cut down from the gallows, Cragh was unquestionably dead, which makes everything that happened next very odd indeed. In later years, when questioned, Lady Mary de Brouize could never quite give a satisfactory answer as to why she interceded on Cragh's behalf, but intercede she did, praying to a former Bishop of Hereford, Thomas de Cantleston, asking that Cragh be brought back to life. Now,
It's not as if de Brouize and Cragh were friends. They were on opposing sides of this very unpleasant war, and Cragh had been caught raiding one of her castles and slaughtering her guards. Lady de Brouize had had no previous dealing with Craghs. It's all a bit of a mystery. And that's just the start of it. Everything about Lady Mary's actions is strange, right down to her choice of intercessor. Even if you're prepared to believe that it's possible to bring people back to life, Thomas de Cantilupe was not exactly an obvious person to pray to. He was not at the time a saint, nor had he been associated with miracles during his lifetime. He died several years earlier after a non-eventful life as a bishop. However you look at it, he was a very strange choice. But strange or not, the really odd thing is, it worked. Cragh did indeed come back to life, days after several witnesses had pronounced him dead. Witnesses who had nothing to gain from his resurrection. In fact, there's a lot of contemporary evidence to suggest that he lived for a further 18 years. Now you may be thinking, well, aren't there lots of dodgy miracle stories like this from this period in history? And the answer to that question is undoubtedly yes, but what makes this one different is how much testimony and evidence there is to actually back it up. The reason why there is so much contemporary record about this case is because news of this story spread throughout the known world. When Pope John the 22nd got to hear about it, he was very sceptical. He summoned all the major players, obviously excluding Cantilupe, but including the executioners, the guards, the chaplain, to meet him for an audience in Rome. They were all rigorously questioned by a panel who recorded every word that was said, and by the end of this process, the Pope was so convinced of the details of the stories to be true that in 1320 he canonised Thomas de Cantilupe and posthumously made him a saint, proclaiming the resurrection of William Cragh to be a bona fide miracle. In 14th century Europe, if there was a miracle, then there had to be a pilgrimage. So to mark this amazing event, Mary de Brouize and William Cragh both set off onto a pilgrimage from Swansea to Hereford to give thanks to the newly appointed saint. By this point, they were incredibly famous. Their celebrity had spread throughout the known world. So as they set off on their pilgrimage, which is known as both the Hangman's Pilgrimage and St. Thomas's Way, vast crowds turned out to see them as they went. Cragh himself must have been something of a showman, because it's recorded that he made the entire pilgrimage barefoot and with a noose hanging round his neck. But this brings us to yet another weird thing, another thing that we need to question, and that is the route that this pilgrimage chose to take. In 14th century Wales, if you wanted to go on a pilgrimage from Swansea to Hereford, there had been a pre-existing and fairly direct route in place since Roman times, the Via Julia Maritima, still in use today, largely covered by the A48, ostensibly built to link the Roman forts between Neath and Gloucester. So if you're going from Swansea to Hereford, that surely is the most obvious route to take. But that is not the route of St. Thomas's Way. It veers off it, leaving at Stormy Down to travel through Tithixton, then on to Candleston, this of course being more than 100 years before the dunes, so this was all good farmland in those days, onto the village of Merthyr Mawr, over the stepping stone, which is where it passes the famous Ogmore Castle. Then it goes up to Ewenny Priory, where it could have rejoined the main route, but no, instead it crosses the River Ewenny again, this time to go to Bridgend, and it doesn't rejoin the logical route you should take in 14th century Wales from Swansea to Hereford until Llancarvan. So what were they thinking of?
As I said previously, this really, even back then, was a real backwater, and it's far from a direct route between Swansea and Hereford. The reason why I believe they came to Ogmore Castle and some of the other places on this route that do take you out of their way is because of a family connection. Now, the majority of the work done here at Ogmore Castle and also at Ewenny Priory was the work of Maurice de Londres, was married to a lady called Mabel, and Mabel's maiden name was Mabel de Cantilupe. She was in fact the saint's sister. So when they visited this castle, the person who was living here at the time, one Howys de Chaworth by this point, because she had married into a new bloodline. She was the granddaughter of the saint's sister, and they were not the only de Cantilupes in this area.
According to the Dispenser survey of 1320, a man called Robert de Cantilupe was recorded as residing in the Tythegston area. Now here's the one who is credited with having built Candleston Castle. In fact, the name Candleston is believed to be a derivation of Cantilupe's town. So clearly, the Cantilupes were major players in the area at this time. There is also a tomb dedicated to the Cantilupes at the Church of Newcastle in Bridgend. So suddenly, it begins to make sense why this rather sporadic route was taken by the pilgrims. They were simply visiting the relatives of the saint to whom they were making a pilgrimage.
I have to say though, that isn't the end of the sacred connections with Ogmore Castle. This is going to sound unlikely, but I recently met a man who is a Druid, and I swear to God, this isn't somebody in a pub turned around and said, "I'm a Druid, you know." I knew he was a Druid and then arranged to meet him, so he definitely was a Druid. And he had a theory that I would love to share with you. And his theory was this. When we translate Bridgend to Penabont, he thinks we're barking up completely the wrong tree. Because his theory is that Bridgend, just like St. Bride's, Bristol, Brighton, even Britain, you know, that the name has its root in the pagan goddess Bridget, who later, a lot of the legends about Bridget were kind of usurped by the early Christian missionaries, and she became St. Bridget of Kildare. There's a big kind of wishy-washy copy and paste of stories about the one transferred to the other. However, Bridget had a symbol that maybe some of you will find familiar. Her symbol was the pelican, because she was a goddess of mothers and of nurturing. And there is a legend which derives from her originally, but has since been transposed into other people in history, that she took the form of a pelican, so when her children were starving, she could prick her own breast to yield blood so that they would have food. That's where that originates from. Now, that filters through into all sorts of things. My old school emblem was a pelican pricking its breast. So it even washes through to things like that. But it all originates from Bridget. Now, one of the things that he points to, I mean, there's two things really. First of all, Bridgend is clearly, you know, could be rooted in Bridget. St. Bride's, without a shadow of a doubt, is rooted in Bridget. In addition to that, of course, the local pub just around the corner from here.
Yeah, it's called the Pelican. Now, I have spent enough of my time researching the history of Wales's pubs to know perfectly well that this pub was not here pre-Christian times. However, the name is taken for a symbol that has been associated with this area for as far back as anyone can remember. And people generally attribute the pelican symbol to something that was worn on the pilgrimage that we've been talking about in this video. But there is a possibility, let us not absolutely deny it, there is a possibility that it's a lot older than that, and that the symbolism of the pelican is attributed to this place because it was a place associated with Bridget. There is no doubt, you can see from the earthworks at Ogmore Castle, that there is absolutely no doubt that there was a pre-existing settlement on this site. And who knows, maybe this settlement was a holy place dedicated to St. Bridget. We will never know. This is pure speculation, but I thought it was at least worth throwing into this video for discussion.
So look, I really hope you've enjoyed this video, and if you'd like to find out more about the story we've covered in it, then it all is covered in this book. More Legends and Folklore from Barry, Bridgend and the Vale. It's the sequel to my first one, covers a lot of similar kind of stories, but some of these stories you will never have heard before. A point in hand right here, right now. It's available from my own website, also available from Amazon and all good independent bookshops. So look, if you'd enjoyed this video, by all means share it on social media. I think that's a belting story, I've got to be honest, but then I'm a bit biased. I think history's fantastic. And if you want to keep finding out more about our local history, please subscribe to this YouTube channel. I upload on average 2 videos a month. They're all between Swansea and Cardiff, between the beginning of history and modern times. So look, until the next time we meet, enjoy your history.